Have you ever tried or thought of trying the low histamine diet and wondered, do I actually have to avoid all this? You may have even noticed the inconsistencies across lists and became confused. Well, turns out researchers measured histamine levels in food, and those actually high in histamine are only a fraction of those lists. Of course, levels of histamine in food depends on freshness and storage conditions since it increases in food with time. An extreme example is fish, which can become really high in histamine when not kept chilled properly, and is the cause of most cases of histamine intoxication. I experienced this once after having sushi. My whole chest and parts of my face started to turn a blotchy bright red, and my friends noticed it first. Because I have other food allergies, we headed to an emergency room just to be safe as I wasn't sure what was happening at the time. It was all pretty anticlimactic, just being prescribed Benadryl and watched for a while. Everyone agrees that anything fermented, cured, or aged would be generally high in histamine, but there are only a few fresh foods that are: eggplant, spinach, and to a lesser degree, tomato. Then what's everything else on those lists? Histamine is a diamine, broken down by diamine oxidase, or DAO, in the gut. This enzyme also breaks down other diamines, as its name suggests. An example is putrescine, high in citrus. And then there's alcohol, which can enhance the toxic effect of histamine. So, up to this point, it makes sense for an intolerance of histamine plus other diamines that can be explained by an enzyme deficiency. Beyond this, it gets weirder. Certain foods have been tagged as histamine liberators. The list of foods with suggested histamine releasing capacity that can be found in various scientific articles includes citrus, seafood, papaya, tomato, nuts, pineapple, spinach, chocolate, and strawberries, among others. However, no mechanism has been proved. In fact, the only available extensive review regarding this so-called histamine releasing capacity of certain foods clearly stated that there's a lack of evidence supporting this mechanism. This means it's no longer about ingested histamine. It's now about your body being triggered to release a bunch of histamine. And how would these release histamine from the body? That means now things like mast cells are reacting. Your immune system is involved. So we're now in hidden allergy territory. And there also may be a considerable overlap with mast cell activation syndrome. And I want to tackle that soon, so subscribe. We talk a lot on this channel about the many ways you can have your immune system reacting to something, yet not show up on standard allergy testing. And I suspect the reason why this mechanism couldn't be found is because what one person would react to would be different from what another person would react to, which is exactly what you would expect from allergies. Another complicating factor that may have had people rule out allergies early on, other than, of course, the negative testing, might be cofactors. This is when you only react when you have multiple things happening at once. It can be multiple foods in combination, or it can be food plus exercise, certain drugs or alcohol, even your menstrual cycle. This, by the way, is established science, and I have a whole video on it here. In a 2023 study, people suspected of having histamine intolerance were given peppermint tea that may or may not have been laced with histamine. Less than 7% reacted only to histamine and not to placebo. Another 8% was thought to possibly have histamine intolerance after a detailed case review, as they had objective reactions to histamine and only subjective symptoms to placebo. That leaves 85% who likely have something else going on. So if you got relief from a low histamine diet, there's a good chance it wasn't from the ingested histamine. Your symptoms are real, but they may be happening in a different way than you thought. So how do you find out for yourself? It would be great if these challenges were easily accessible for more patients, but in the meantime, the study offers a couple of clues. Those who seemed likely to truly have histamine intolerance had mostly gastrointestinal symptoms. So if your symptoms are elsewhere, it's more likely it's your body releasing all that histamine. Also, if your symptoms are mostly gastrointestinal, it would be prudent to first rule out other common causes like FODMAPs, IBS, or reflux. Serum DAO levels were also mentioned. Serum DAO testing is generally considered useless to confirm histamine intolerance, as it doesn't correlate well to DAO levels in the gut, and healthy people have a wide range of serum DAO levels. But it may still be useful in ruling out histamine intolerance, as this study found that 100% of the people with levels higher than 16 units per ml did not have it. Now, this is just one study, so more evidence is needed here. Also, just generally, have you noticed any dose dependence in your symptoms, like more high histamine foods, more symptoms? Of course, you'd have to include only the foods actually high in diamines here, not the rest. So if you're unlikely to have histamine intolerance, what is actually going on? Another possibility is tyramine. High tyramine foods overlap a lot with high histamine foods. All the fermented, aged, pickled, or cured things are high in both. Exceptions are eggplant and spinach, which can have histamine but much less tyramine, and avocado, banana, and raspberries, which have tyramine, especially when overripe, but negligible histamine. The best known tyramine intolerance symptoms are bad headaches or migraines. Histamine and tyramine have the opposite effect on your cardiovascular system. Histamine dilates your blood vessels and causes your blood pressure to drop. Tyramine raises blood pressure and can cause all the symptoms that follow from that: chest pain, rapid heart rate, shortness of breath, sweating, nausea, a sense of heat, redness, and chills. Tyramine is not a diamine, but a monoamine, so it's cleared by another enzyme, monoamine oxidase. Chocolate, which is frequently found on the histamine diet list, is actually low in histamine, but high in monoamines, beta-phenylethylamine, plus a modest amount of tyramine. One good news relevant for any of the amines is that thanks to better hygiene and production standards worldwide, biogenic amine levels in food have greatly reduced. So when looking for this information, you have to look at the most recent food science data. Many food production processes now use starter cultures to minimize biogenic amine formation. Thanks to this, for example, many commercial cheeses now have pretty low tyramine levels, whether they are hard, semi-hard, acid curd style, or soft. At least for amine-sensitive people, commercial brands tend to be safer than artisanal, craft, or gourmet products. Another possibility is mold or yeast allergies, as I talked about in my previous video. If you find your symptoms are less when these foods are cooked or baked, this is the more likely culprit, as histamine won't change with cooking, but many allergens, being proteins, will. If it's not specifically fermented or cured foods, but you do feel better on the low histamine diet, and your symptoms are not just confined to the gastrointestinal symptoms, it's more likely from histamine and other mediators released from your own immune cells. This might be a mast cell disorder or hidden allergies. In this case, it's more likely you're only reacting to a few things on the long list, and it would be worth narrowing down to your real culprits. Granted, this is easier said than done, as reactions can be inconsistent due to cofactors, or chronic and delayed when you have non-IgE mediated mechanisms going on. You could try reintroducing the things you have been avoiding one at a time to see if they actually cause you an issue or not. Just be cautious when you start reintroducing foods, especially if you have any history of allergic disease. You might want to watch this video first so you don't accidentally suffer a dangerous reaction. So, most people who think they might have histamine intolerance, the problem may not in fact be ingested histamine. It might be tyramine, mast cell disorders, or hidden allergies, and in any case, you can likely add back quite a few foods to your diet. I hope this helped you get closer to your personal answer. Feel free to share what you found out so far. it might help others along a similar journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next.